Okay, there it is. Good afternoon and welcome to, we think, the 16th year. Many, many more times has Tim told the story, but this is the 16th year he's doing it, of Tim Coombs telling of A Christmas Carol. A few housekeeping details. The bathrooms, if you haven't already discovered them, are through those doors, through that area, and to the right down the hall. And there will be a short intermission, and we invite you to enjoy our homemade scones and shortbread by our own chef, Nikki Bain. You will also find free will baskets around the annex. All the proceeds, if you choose to throw something in there, will go to our building renovation. There are some pictures of what we're planning to do out in the annex as well, and any of us here can answer any questions you might have. Tim would especially like to thank our daughter-in-law, Jess King Coombs, who created his new suit for this year's performance. So look closely. It is beautifully, beautifully done. One note, someone noted that in the written bulletin you have, it says that our Christmas Eve service is at 9 p.m. That's wrong. It's at 8 p.m., as is being said on the slides that you may have seen. So we would love to have you come for Christmas Eve services. Don't come at 9, unless you only want to sing Silent Night by candlelight. And now I invite you all to sit back and relax and enjoy A Christmas Carol told as story.
I would like to share with you a ghostly little tale that I wrote in 1843. I hope it does not put you out of sorts with yourselves, with your neighbor, and especially with me. May it haunt you pleasantly. To begin. Marley was dead to begin with. There can be no doubt about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clerk, the clergyman, the undertaker, and the chief mourner, and Scrooge also signed it. And Scrooge's name is good upon the change as anything he put his hand to. Oh, there can be no doubt about it. Marley was dead as a doornail. But mind you, I don't know what there is so dead about a doornail. If you ask me, a coffin nail would be the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. Oh, but there's wisdom in the sayings of the ancestors, so I will not disturb the proverb, but simply repeat most emphatically that Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Oh, of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge was Marley's sole executor. His sole sign, his sole administrator, his sole residual legatee, his sole mourner, and sole friend. But Scrooge wasn't so cut up by the sad event that he wasn't a very good man of business, and on the very day of the funeral he did not solemnize it with an undoubted bargain. Oh, the mere mention of Marley's death brings me back to the point that Marley was dead to begin with. This must be clearly understood, or nothing good can come from the story I am about to relate. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood for years and years on the warehouse store, Scrooge and Marley. Scrooge and Marley was the name of the firm. Some people new to the business called Scrooge, other times Marley, but he answered to both names. Oh, it was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand to the grindstone, Scrooge was. A squeezing, retching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint as secret and self-contained and as solitary as an oyster. Why, the cold within him froze his features. It nipped at his pointed nose. It shriveled his cheek. It stiffened his gait. He made his eyes red and thin lips blue, which spoke out shrewdly in a grating voice. There was a frosty rime on his head, and on his brow, and on his wiry chin. In fact, external heat and cold had little influence upon Scrooge. No warmth could warm him, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was better than him, and the heaviest rain and snow could best him in only one account. They often fell handsomely, but Scrooge never did. No one ever stopped Scrooge in the street and said, "My dear Mr. Scrooge, how are you? When will you come see me?" No beggar ever implored a trifle of him. No children ever stopped him on the street and asked what o'clock it was. And no man and woman ever once in his life stopped him to ask where it was to such and such a house. In fact, even blind men's dogs seemed to know him, and they would see him coming on. They would pull their masters into doorways and courts, as if to say, "No eye's better than an evil eye, master." Oh, but what did Scrooge care? Was the very thing he liked. Now, of all the blessed days of the year, on Christmas Eve, Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold and bleak and foggy and biting weather. And though the city clocks had just gone 3 o'clock, it was dark already. Now, Scrooge kept the door of his counting house open so he could keep an eye on his clerk in a dismal little cell, a sort of tank, really, who sat copying letters. Scrooge's fire was very small, but his clerk's even smaller, and looked to be but a single coal. But he couldn't replenish it because Scrooge kept the coal box in his own office. Once when the clerk went into his office with a shovel, that the master predicted it may be time for them to part. Oh, and it had grown colder yet, that the clerk tried to warm his hands by his candle, but not being a man of great imagination, he failed. "Good evening, Uncle. How are you?" This was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, Fred, who had just come in through the door. "Bah," said Scrooge, without looking up from his labors, and then followed it with a humbug. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that." "Oh, I do. What's there to be so merry about? You're poor enough. What's there to be so dismal about? You're rich enough." "Bah," said Scrooge. "Oh, don't be cross, Uncle." "What else can I be when I live in a world of fools such as this? Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time but a time for you, but a time of paying bills without any money? A time to find yourself another year older and not an hour richer. Why, if I could work my way, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly in its heart." I like that idea. "Uncle, nephew, you keep Christmas in your way and let me keep it in mine." "Well, you don't keep it." "Well, let me leave it alone then. A fine lot it has ever done you." "Oh, Uncle, there are many things by which I have profited but are not benefited in the least. Christmas, I dare say, is one of them. I believe Christmas to be, well, a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time of year. While the only time of year I know of in the long calendar year where men and women freely open up their shut-up hearts and treat one another as fellow travelers to the grave rather than other creatures bent on other journeys. And though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in me pocket, I say Christmas has done me good, and Christmas will do me good, and I say God bless it." The clerk in his cell involuntarily applauded, but when he realized his impropriety, he poked out his fire and extinguished his coal forever. Scrooge said, "Let me hear another sound out of you, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation." And then turning towards his nephew, he said, "Why, you're quite a powerful speaker, sir. I wonder why you don't go for Parliament." "Oh, Uncle, come and have dinner with us tomorrow." "Why did you get married?" "Because I fell in love." "You fell in love?" "Oh, Uncle, I ask nothing from you. I want nothing from you." "Good afternoon." "Well, I have made my homage to Christmas, and I will keep my Christmas humor to the very last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle." "Good afternoon." "And a Happy New Year." "Good afternoon." The nephew paused at the door to wish season's greetings upon the clerk, who returned them cordially, to which Scrooge said, "There's another fellow, my clerk. 15 shillings and a wife and family. I'll be retired to Bedlam." Now, the clerk, on letting Scrooge's nephew out, let in 2 gentlemen, pleasant to behold, rather portly gentlemen, who now stood with their hats in hands in Scrooge's office. "Have we the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead for 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night." "Well, no doubt his liberality is well represented by a surviving partner." "Bah. Mr. Scrooge, at this festive time of year, it is usually more than customary for us to make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer so." "Are there no prisons?" "Oh, plenty of prisons." "And the union workhouses, are they still in operation?" "They are, but I wish to say that they weren't." "Oh, by what you said, gentlemen, I thought something had stopped them in their useful course." The other said, "Mr. Scrooge, a few of us are endeavoring to buy the poor some food and drink and means of warmth. What can we put you down for?" "Nothing." "Oh, you wish to remain anonymous?" "I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, that is it. I don't make merry myself at Christmas. I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support those institutions which I have mentioned. Those who are too poor ought to go there." "But some can't go there, and some would rather die." "Well, if they'd rather die, let them do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, I don't know that." "Well, you could know that." "It's not my business," said Scrooge. "It's enough for a man to be concerned with his own business and not interfere in anybody else's. Mine occupies me constantly." The gentlemen, on seeing it would be pointless to pursue their point, left by the door, and Scrooge went back to his labors with a rather high opinion of himself than was usual, and a better temperament. Oh, and it had grown colder yet. The owner of a scant young nose bent at Scrooge's keyhole and regaled him with a Christmas carol. "God bless ye, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay." Scrooge grabbed the ruler with such energy that the owner of the scant nose ran off, leaving the darkness and the fog to the keyhole. Well, at long last, the time for shutting up the counting house arrived, and Scrooge dismissed his clerk with an ill will, who now put his hat on and snuffed out his candle, and was standing in Scrooge's office. Scrooge said, "I guess you'll be wanting the whole day tomorrow." "If quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient and not fair. If I were to stop you half a crown, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound." "It's only once a year, sir." "Fine excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you shall have the whole day. You be here all the earlier the next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge left the office with a growl, and then went and took his usual melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and then retired to his rooms that once belonged to his partner, Jacob Marley. Now, no one lived in this building except for Scrooge, except for some businesses that rented out the rooms, like a wine merchant who kept his casks in the cellar. Scrooge approached his door with its rather large knocker. Now, it is a fact that there's nothing exceptional about this knocker, is that it's exceptionally large, and is also a fact that Scrooge had passed it every evening and every morning, but it paid it little notice. But when he looked at the knocker this time, it was not a knocker, but the face of Jacob Marley. Whoa! It had a pale light about it and looked like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. This startled Scrooge. But when he looked at it again, it was a knocker again. Scrooge turned the key and opened the door and lit a candle. He did look cautiously behind the door, half expecting to see old Marley's pigtail sticking out the back, but all he saw were the nuts and screws that held the knocker in place. "Humbug," said Scrooge, and slammed the door shut. The sound reverberated through the hall, but Scrooge wasn't a man to be frightened by echoes. Scrooge fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for the darkness. Darkness was cheap, and Scrooge liked it that way. He did pause before shutting his chamber door to inspect his rooms to make sure that all was right. Quite satisfied, he fastened his door. He double fastened his door, which was not his usual custom. And then, now feeling secure, he took off his cravat, he put on his nightshirt, his slippers and his nightshirt, and sat down by his fire to take his gruel. Oh, it was not much of a fire that Scrooge was obliged to lean over it, to brood over it, in order to extract the least bit of warmth from a handful of coal. "Humbug," he said, and threw his head back in the chair. And when he did, he noticed a disused bell that hung against the wall. And it was with great astonishment and a strange, inexplicable dread, as Scrooge looked at this bell, it swayed a little. It swayed so little that it scarcely made a sound, and then it rang out along with every bell in the house. This went on for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, but it seemed to Scrooge more like an hour, and then all the bells ceased the way they began, together. It was succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, like someone dragging a heavy chain over the cask of the wine merchant's cellars. And then the cellar door flew open with a booming sound. Now the sound grew louder. On the floor below, coming up the stairs right for his room. "It's humbug still! I won't believe it," said Scrooge. His color changed when, without a pause, he came right through his door and stood before him. Upon its coming in, the low fire sprang to life as if to say, "I know him! It's Marley's ghost!" And then it died again. The same face, the very same. Marley in his waistcoat, tights, and boots. The chain he drew was clasped around his middle and wrapped around him like a tail. It was made of keys and locks and cash boxes, deeds, ledgers, and heavy purses wrought in steel. And Molly was transparent, such that Scrooge, looking at his middle, could see the 2 buttons on the back of his waistcoat. He had often heard that Molly had no bowels, but up until now he had not believed it. Scrooge looked at this figure in front of him, and though he could feel the chilling effect of his death-cold eyes and could trace the texture of the kerchief round his head and chin, Scrooge was incredulous and doubted his senses. He said, "What do you want with me?" The figure said, "Much." Oh, it was Marley's voice. There could be no doubt about that. "Well, who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Well, who were you then?" "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." "Can you sit down?" "I can." "Do it then." Marley sat opposite Scrooge and stared right at him. And though he kept perfectly still, his hair and tails and tassels were agitated as if from the vapors of a hot oven. "You don't believe in me?" I don't," said Scrooge. "Why would you doubt your senses?" "Because a little thing upsets them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. Why, you may be a bit of undigested beef, a crumb of cheese, a blot of mustard, a fragment of an underdone potato. Why, there's more gravy than grave about you." Whoa! Marley stood up and clanked his chains with an appalling sound that Scrooge grabbed the arms of his chair. But how much greater would his horror be when Marley undid the folded kerchief around his head and his lower jaw dropped upon his chest. Scrooge fell to his knees and held up his prayer and said, "Mercy, why do you trouble me?" "It is required of every man that his spirit walk about his fellow beings. If it does not do so in life, it is condemned to do so in death. My spirit must wander the world and witness what it cannot share, but might have and turn to happiness." Again, Marley shook his chains and yelled and wrenched his shadowy hands. Scrooge said, "Why do you wear those chains?" "I wear the chains I forged in life, link by link and yard by yard. I gird them of my own free will, and of my own free will I wear them." "Is its pattern familiar to you?" Scrooge began to tremble. "Oh, Ebenezer, if you knew the length and the weight of the chain you bear yourself. It was long and full and heavy as this 7 years ago. You have labored on it since." Scrooge looked down at his feet, half expecting to see 50 or 60 fathoms of iron rail, but saw nothing. He said, "Oh, Jacob, have mercy. Speak some comfort to me." "I have none to give. I cannot rest. I cannot linger. Oh, why did my spirit never move beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and now restless journeys lie before me." 7 years, and traveling all the time? You travel fast? On the wings of the wind. Well, I would guess you saw a great deal of land in 7 years. "Whoa!" said Marley and rattled his chains. "Captive bound in double iron, not to know any Christian spirit working kindly find its vast mortal life too short for its vast usefulness." Scrooge said, "But you're a good man of business." "Business? Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Marley held up his chains and threw them on the floor. It is at this rolling time of year that I suffer most. Oh, why did I always walk about with my eyes cast down, never once looking up to see that star that led the wise men to the poor abode? Were there no poor abodes that its light could conduct me? Scrooge really began to shake now. Hear me, my time is nearly done. I have sat invisible beside you these last 7 years. That was no light part of my penance. This was not an agreeable idea to Scrooge, and he wiped his brow. Ebenezer, I am here to warn you that you still have a chance and hope of avoiding my fate. You were a good friend to me, Jacob. You will be haunted by 3 ghosts. Is that the chance and hope you spoke of? It is. Rather not. Without these visits, you cannot hope to avoid the path I tread. Expect the first ghost when the clock tolls 1. Couldn't I have them all at once and be done with it? Expect the second ghost and the next night at the same hour. When it said this, Marley grabbed its kerchief and retied its head as before. And then he began to step backwards. And with every step, the curtain, the window went up a little. Expect the third ghost when the last stroke of 12 ceases to vibrate. And when he finished saying this, the window was completely up. He beckoned Scrooge to come near, and Scrooge did. But when he was within 2 paces, Marley held up his hand as if to say, "Come no closer," and Scrooge obeyed. Scrooge heard confused noises in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings inexpressibly sorrowful and self-accusatory. Marley joined in the mournful dirge, and then he floated out into the night air. Scrooge ran to the window and looked out. The air was full of phantoms moving hither and thither in restless haste. They were all chained like Marley's ghost. Some of them were chained together. None of them were free. Some of them had been personally known to Scrooge in life. One old ghost with a monstrous safe chained to his ankle cried piteously as he tried to assist the poor widow who sat in a doorway with her infant. In fact, all the ghosts tried to assist for good, but it lost the power forever. And Scrooge wasn't sure if the ghosts faded into the darkness and mist, or the darkness and mist overshadowed them. But they and their mournful voices all disappeared, and the night became as it was when Scrooge walked home. Scrooge shut the window. Boom! And then, much in need of sleep, he went home. He went straight to bed and fell into a deep sleep. Forget it, Captain. having technical difficulties. Click down, Glenn. When Scrooge awoke, it was dark. And sitting up in bed, he could not tell the difference between his opaque walls and the transparent windows of his room. He was endeavoring to pierce the darkness with his deep ferret eyes when a local church tower sounded a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy. One light flashed in an instant in his chamber, and the curtains of his bed were drawn aside. And Scrooge found himself face to face with the unearthly creature that drew them. And he was as near as it as I am to you, and I am in the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange creature, like a child, but more like an old man, diminished to a child's proportions. That hair that ran down its back was white with old age, and yet there was not a wrinkle on its skin, and the tenderest bloom there. It wore a tunic of bright white, with a lustrous belt around its waist, the sheen of which was beautiful. And it held a fresh sprig of Christmas holly in its hand. But the strangest thing about this creature was that from the crown of its head there shone a clear jet of light by which all of this was seen, and which was the occasion of its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap it held under its arm. As Scrooge looked at the creature, it seemed to fluctuate in its distinctness. Now it was a spirit with one arm, and then one leg, and then it was a pair of legs without a head, and then it was a head without a body, and then it was itself as clear as ever. Scrooge said, "Are you the spirit whose coming was foretold to me?" "I am," it said. What are you?" "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" "Your past." Scrooge asked what business it had in coming to him, and it said, "Your welfare." And Scrooge thought to himself that uninterrupted rest would have been more conducive to that point, but the spirit seemed to hear his thoughts, so it said, "Your reclamation, then. Rise and walk with me." And when Scrooge saw that the spirit was making towards the window, he grabbed his robe in supplication and said, "Good spirit, I am mortal and will fall." "There, by a touch of my hand here," it said, touching him on the chest, "and you will be upheld in more than this." And when they said this, they walked right through the wall, and Scrooge found himself on an open country road, and fields were on either side. The city was completely gone. Not a vestige of it was left. And along with it went the darkness in the midst, because now they were standing on a bright, clear, cold winter's day, and snow was on the ground. Scrooge said, "What? I was a boy." Scrooge was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the night and the day, and each one connected to a different thought, hope, care, and joy long ago forgotten. The Spirit said, Your lip is trembling, and what is that upon your cheek? Nothing. It's just a pimple, that's all. Do you recollect the way? Remember it? Why, I could walk it blindfolded. Pity to have forgotten it after all these years. They walked down this road, and Scrooge, remembering every gate, post, and tree along the way. Soon they came to a market town with its church, bridge, and river. And then in the distance they saw some shaggy ponies trotting towards them with boys on their backs. They were followed by more boys on gigs and carts driven by farmhands. In fact, all these boys were in high spirits, and they shouted to one another, "Merry Christmas!" such that the air was filled with their merry music, and the crisp air was glad to hear it. The Spirit said, "These are the shadows of the things that have been. They are not conscious of us." And then it said, "The school from which they came is not yet deserted. One solitary boy, neglected by his friends, remains." I know, Spirit. I know. They left this high road and walked down a well-remembered lane until they came to a mansion of dull red brick. They went inside the dreary hall, and they began to look inside through many doors and many rooms that were long, cold, and vast. In one particular room, bare, melancholy room, made bare as still by the line of desks, there sat a solitary boy reading a book by a small fire. The Spirit touched Scrooge on his arm and pointed to his former self. Scrooge went forward and sat on a desk opposite the boy and said, "Poor boy, I wish I'd given him something." The Spirit said, "Is something the matter?" "There was just a boy singing Christmas carols outside my door. I wish I would have given him something." Let us see another Christmas. And with that, the room began to change. It grew older. Plaster fell from the walls. And the boy himself changed. He grew older and was no longer sitting now, but was pacing about the room. Scrooge shook his head at this transformation. And then the door flew open, and in came a little girl, much younger than the boy. She ran up to him, threw her arms around him, and kissed him 12 times, and addressed him, saying, "I've come to take you home, dear brother. I've come to take you home, home, home." The boy said, "Home, little Fan?" "Oh, yes, home forever and ever. Oh, Father is much kinder than he used to be. That home is like heaven, and you sent me with a coach to fetch you, and you're never to come back here ever again. But first, we're to be with each other all Christmas Day and have the merriest time in all the world." She reached up, hugged him, and kissed him again, and took him by the hand and led him out the door. The Spirit said, "Always a delicate creature, that a breath might have withered. But she had a large heart." I know, Spirit. I won't gainsay it. "She died a woman with children?" "One child. Your nephew." "Come, let us see another Christmas." And with that, Scrooge found himself on the busy thoroughfares of a city. Shadowy passengers were passing and repassing. Coaches and carts were battling for the way. And it was evening now, and the lamplighters were about their task. And Scrooge could tell by the shop windows that heretofore it was Christmas time. They walked down the street, and the Spirit stopped before a certain warehouse door. Scrooge said, Why, I was an apprentice here." They went inside, and at the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig who sat at a desk so high that if it had been 2 inches taller, he would have bumped his head against the ceiling, that Scrooge remarked, "Why, it's old Fezziwig, alive again. Why, let's bless his heart, old Fezziwig." Yes, old Fezziwig put down his pen and looked up at the clock, which read 7 o'clock. And then he rubbed his hands together, tugged at his capacious waistcoat, and called out, "Yo-ho, Dick! Yo-ho, Ebenezer!" Scrooge's former self, now a young man, came dashing in, followed by his fellow apprentice. "Dick Wilkins, to be sure, there he is. Oh, Dick, oh, he was mighty attached to me, was dear Dick." Fezziwig said, "We'll have no more work tonight, my lads. It's Christmas Eve, Dick. It's Christmas Eve, Ebenezer. Now go and put up those shutters before a man can say Jack Robinson." The boys ran out and put the shutters into place. 1, 2, 3. They put the bolts into position. 4, 5, 6, and then locked them into place. 7, 8, 9. And then in they came, and Fezziwig say, "Clear away, me lads. We must have room here." Clear away? Well, there's nothing the boys wouldn't or couldn't clear away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was cast away as if it was banished for public life forever. And then the floors were swept and watered, the fires made up, and the lamps were lit, and soon the warehouse was as warm and snug and bright, as dry as you would want a banquet house on a Christmas Eve. And then in came the fiddler with music under his arm and went up into the high desk and made an orchestra of it, and then tuned up his fiddle, which sounded like 50 stomach aches. And then in came Mrs. Fezziwig with her capacious smile. In came the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In came their 6 followers whose hearts they broke. In came the cook and the housemaids. In came all the young men and women of the business, everyhow and anyhow, some boldly, some shyly, some awkwardly, some gracefully, and then away they all went, 20 couples at a time, halfway round and back again, up the middle and back again. Oh, that old head couple, always turning up at the wrong spot. New head couple taking off as soon as they got there. Why, there could have been 4 times as many people there. And old Fezziwig, despite his rotundness, was more than their match on the dance floor. And Mrs. Fezziwig was his equal in every respect. And that is high praise. And if there's higher praise, you tell me it, and I will use it. Finally, Fezziwig clapped his hands and said, "Well done, well done." And then the fiddler plunged his face in a pot of porter preserved for that purpose. And then there were more dances. And there was cake and more dances and plum puddings and more dances and a great piece of cold roast and more dances and plenty of beer and more dances. But when the hands of the clock read 11 o'clock, and the domestic ball began to break up, Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig each took their position, one on either side of the door, in order to greet their partygoers and to wish them a Merry Christmas as they left. The Spirit said, "A small matter to make these silly folk so full of happiness? This whole party cost a few pounds of your mortal money, three or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves praise?" "Oh, it isn't that, Spirit. It's that he had the power to make us happy or unhappy, to make our work a pleasure or a toil or light or burdensome. With the happiness he gave was afterwards worth a fortune." And when Scrooge felt the Spirit's eyes, he became quiet. The Spirit said, "Is something the matter?" "No, Spirit. It's just that I wish to have had a word or 2 with my clerk this morning. That's all. My time grows short. Let us see another Christmas." And Scrooge's former clerk turned down the lamp as if he had given utterance to the wish. And then Scrooge saw himself again. Now a man in the prime of his life. But though he didn't bear the harsh lines of old age, he did start to show the signs of care and avarice. He was not alone on that park bench, for sitting next to him was a pretty young lass who had tears in her eyes that reflected back the light of the ghost of Christmas past. She began. "A small matter," she said. "Another idol has possessed you. But if it can offer you care and comfort as I would have striven to do, I have no cause grieve." Scrooge said, "What idol has possessed me?" "A golden one, Ebenezer. Oh, you fear the world too much. I have watched as your nobler aspirations have fallen off one by one until the master passion, gain, obsesses you. Have I not?" "Oh, what then? What then? If I become all the wiser, what of it? I'm not changed toward you." "In words, no." "Well, in what then?" "You are changed in nature. Alter spirit, another atmosphere of life. Oh, Ebenezer, if you were free, would you choose a dowryless girl such as me? I do know. And so I release you, Ebenezer, with a full heart for the man that you once were. May you be happy in the life you have chosen." And she left, and they each parted alone. "Oh, Spirit, show me no more. Bring me back. Why do you delight in torturing me?" "One shadow more." "No more, no more. I don't want to see it. Show me no more." But the ghost pinioned Scrooge's arms at his sides and forced him to look at what was next. They were now in a room, not very big or handsome. And then Scrooge saw her by her own fire, a pretty young girl. It looked so much like the last that he thought it was the same. But then he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter in their own home. They were not alone, as the room was perfectly tumultuous, as there were more children there, that Scrooge, in his agitated state, could not count them. And there was once a poet who said that there were 50 children acting as one. Well, each one of these children was acting like 50. And then a knocking was heard at the door. And such a bustle ensued that the mother, with laughing face, had to part the boisterous company in order to let in their father, who came in loaded with Christmas gifts and toys. Oh, the children used chairs as ladders in order to dive into his pockets in order to despoil him of his brown paper parcels. Oh, they hung on to his cravat and clung around the neck with anxious affection. Oh, the wonder and delight by which the development of each gift was received. And now Scrooge watched all the closer as the master of the house, with his daughter leaning fondly at his side, sat with her and her mother across from his own fire. And when Scrooge thought that another creature, so full of promise and full of grace, might have called him father, and been the springtime of the haggard winter of his years, his eyes became dim. The husband began. "Bill, I saw an old friend of yours today." "Who?" she said. "Guess." "Oh, I don't know. Ebenezer Scrooge? Right, Ebenezer Scrooge. I was walking by his office. His shutters were open. He had a candle lit. I couldn't scarcely not see him. You know, I hear his partner lies dying this very night. But there he was, working all alone, quite alone in all the world. Scrooge said, "Spirit, remove me from this place." The Spirit said, "These are the shadows of the things that have been. That they are, do not blame me. Remove me, I cannot bear it. Take me back, leave me, haunt me no longer." And with a sudden effort, Scrooge grabbed the great extinguisher and plunged it over the Spirit's head. The Spirit's form dropped completely underneath it. Nothing of it was seen. There was just a flood of light on the ground below. And as Scrooge was wrestling with this cap, he became conscious of being in his own room and of just how tired he was. He gave the cap a parting squeeze and that light vanished. Scrooge had barely time to reel to bed, and he fell asleep upon the instant.
Rejoice and be merry, said Saul.
Scrooge awoke in the middle of a prodigious snore, and sitting up in bed in order to get his thoughts together, he found himself the core and center of a bright, ruddy light which streamed across the bed when the local church sounded the hour. And being only light, it was more alarming than if it were a dozen ghosts. In time, however, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light seemed to be coming from, on further examination, an adjoining room from whence it seemed to shine. He got up softly in his slippers and shuffled to the door. And when his hand was upon the latch, a strange voice greeted him by name. "Come in, Ebenezer Scrooge." It was his own room. There could be no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling hung with a living green, from every part of which bright, glistening berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light as if many tiny mirrors were scattered there. And such a fire roared up the old chimney that dull petrification of a heart never knew in Scrooge's day, or Molly's, or a many winter's days gone past. And heaped upon the floor as a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, and game, poultry, brawn, and great cuts of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, luscious pears, juicy oranges, enormous 12 cakes, and seething bowls of punch which made the room dim with their steam. And on easy estate upon this couch sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, and in his hand it held a golden torch that it held high up, high, so that its light could stream down upon Scrooge, who was peeking round the corner. "Come in and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. The spirit was clothed in a plain green robe bordered with white fur, and it hung so loosely on its capacious breast as if it warded or disdained being guarded by any sort of artifice, and on its head it had a wreath of holly adorned here and there with icicles. "Have you ever seen the likes of me?" Scrooge said, never. Have you ever known any of my younger brothers and sisters? Oh, I'm very young. Any of my older brothers and sisters and these Christmases before? No, Spirit, I don't think I have. Have you many brothers and sisters? Over 1,800. Quite a family to provide for. Oh, good Spirit, I went forth last night and learned a lesson that is working on me still. If you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe. Scrooge did so and hung on tight, and the holly and the ivy, the poultry and pigs all disappeared. Along with it went the ruddy light, the fire, the room, and the time of day. But now Scrooge stood on the city streets on Christmas morning. The fronts of the houses were black, but the windows even blacker, contrasting with the sheet of white snow on the roof above and the dirtiest snow on the road beneath. The sky was gloomy and the short streets choked with a dingy mist, as if all the chimneys of Great Britain had caught fire and were blazing to their heart's content. There was nothing cheerful about the city, and yet cheerfulness was in the air, as those who were shoveling from the housetops were jovial and full of glee, and they shouted to one another from the parapets, "Merry Christmas!" and occasionally sharing a facetious snowball. And then church steeple called all good people to church and chapel, and out they came in their best clothes and happiest faces. And also from scores of by streets and lanes there came innumerable people carrying their dinners to the baker's shops. Oh, these poor revelers seemed to interest the Spirit most, because he went with Scrooge right at his side to a certain baker's doorway and uncovered the dinners as the bearers passed and sprinkled a kind of incense on them from his torch. This was a most unusual torch. For once and twice, when dinner carriers shared angry words after jostling one another, the Spirit shed a few drops of water on them from his torch, and their good humor returned upon the instant. They said, "Oh, it's a shame to be quarreling on a Christmas day." And it was, God love it, it was. Scrooge said, "Is there a peculiar flavor that you sprinkle from your torch?" "There is, my own." "Does it work on any dinner given on this day?" "To any kindly given, to a poor one most." "Why a poor one most?" "It needs it most." Spirit, I wonder why you, of all creatures, would prevent these peoples their opportunities for innocent employment. I? Well, you would prevent them from dining on the seventh day, the only day they could dine at all. I? Well, you seek to close these establishments on the seventh day, and it all comes to the same thing. I seek? Well, it has been done in your name or in the name of the members of your family. Oh, there are some in this globe of yours who do their works of pride and prejudice, hatred and ill will, envy, boastfulness, and selfishness in our name, but who are estranged to us as if they were never born. You remember that and charge their deeds to their account, not to mine. And Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on as invisible as before. Now, Scrooge had noticed back at the baker's that it was a remarkable quality of the Spirit that notwithstanding his enormous size, he could accommodate himself wherever they went. The Scrooge wasn't sure if it was the spirit seemed to enjoy showing off this ability, or it was his kind and generous and hearty nature, or his sympathy for all the poor that brought him to Scrooge's clerk's house. But there they went with Scrooge at his side, and on the doorway of Bob Cratchit's house, the spirit stopped and smiled and sprinkled Bob Cratchit's house and the sprinklings of its torch. They went inside, and there was Mrs. Cratchit, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown that was brave with ribbons, and they made a good show for themselves for sixpence. She was folding the cloth with the second of her daughters, a Belinda Cratchit. And then there was Master Peter sticking a fork in a saucepan of potatoes. And then two younger Cratchits came screaming in, saying that they had been to the baker's and smelled their goose. Mrs. Cratchit said, "Where's your poor father gotten to? And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha wasn't as late as this last dear boy half an hour." "Here's Martha, Mother," said the two younger Cratchits, who seemed to be everywhere at once. "Oh, Martha, hurrah, there was such a goose." "How late you are," she said, kissing her daughter a dozen times on the cheeks. "Well, we had a great deal of work to finish up last night, and then we had to clear away this morning." "Well, so long as you come. Oh, how cold you are. Sit down by the fire and have a warm." "No, Martha, no. Here's Father. Hide, Martha, hide." Martha hid herself. And then in came Bob Cratchit, with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. And Bob remarked, "Where's our Martha?" "Not coming," said Mrs. Cratchit. "Not coming on Christmas Day." Oh, but Martha didn't like to see her father disappointed, so she came out from a hiding spot behind the closet door and ran into her father's arms. And the two younger Cratchits ushered Tiny Tim off to the washing house so that he could hear the pudding singing in the copper. Mrs. Cratchit said, "How did Tiny Tim behave?" "Oh, as good as gold and better. You know, he becomes quite thoughtful sitting by himself all day long, and he thinks the strangest things. You know, he said to me on our way home that he hoped the people in the church saw him because he was a cripple, because it might be pleasant for them to remember on Christmas Day who it was that made lame beggars walk and blind men see." "Oh, Tim is getting stronger, isn't he?" Oh, but then Tiny Tim's active little crutch was heard upon the floor before another word could be spoken. And then his brother and sister escorted him by his stool in front of the fire, and Bob concocted in a clay jar a mixture of hot gin and lemons and stirred it round and about and put it upon the hob to keep warm. And then Master Peter and the two ubiquitous Cratchits went to the baker's to fetch their goose, which they brought back in high procession. Oh, such a bustle ensued, they thought that the goose was the rarest of birds. Oh, Mrs. Cratchit got the gravy prepared ahead of time, hissing hot. Master Peter smashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates, and then Bob put Tiny Tim at the corner of the table next to himself, and then the younger Cratchits put chairs from everybody, and at last the dishes were set upon, and grace was said, and it was succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit looked down that long carving knife and prepared to plunge it into the breast. And when she did, and that long expected gush of stuffing oozed forth. There was one murmur of delight all around the board, and Tiny Tim, encouraged by his younger brother and sister, banged his knife handle on the table and feebly shouted, "Hurrah! Oh, there never was such a goose. Its flavor and seasoning, its size and cheapness were the subjects of universal admiration. Eked out by the potatoes and the applesauce, it was a fitting meal for the whole family. And when Mrs. Cratchit eyed but a single bone left upon the platter, that she didn't say, 'Why, if they haven't eaten it all!' And then Belinda got up and began to changing the plates, and Mrs. Cratchit got up alone, too nervous to bear any witnesses, and went to the washing house to turn out the pudding and bring it in. While she was gone, Bob leaned over the table and said, "Suppose it shouldn't be done enough. Suppose it should break in the turning out. Suppose someone gotten over the wall of our backyard and stolen it while we was making merry with the goose." A supposition that made the two younger Cratchits livid. All sorts of horrors were thought of. "Oi! What's that? That's a blot of steam." That was the pudding coming out of the copper, and ooh, a smell of a washing house. That was the cloth coming off the pudding, and a smell of an eating house. That was the pudding. And in half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit returned, flushed and smiling, with the pudding, hard and firm like a bespectacled cannonball, aflame in ignited brandy and bedight with a sprig of Christmas holly in the top. Bob said, "A wonderful pudding, Martha. The best since our wedding day." She said, "I had me doubts about the amount of flour." Everyone had something to say about it, but no one said it was a rather small pudding for such a large family. Oh, it would have been plumb heresy to do so, and any Cratchit would have blushed to suggest such a thing. Well, at long last, dinner was done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth was swept, and the fires made up. Bob sampled the hot stuff in the jar and deemed it perfect. Apples and pears were strewn on the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts were placed upon the fire. And then the family got their chairs around the fire in what Bob called a circle, but was really half a one. And there at Bob's elbow was the family's collection of glassware, which consisted of 2 tumblers and a custard cup missing its handle. Oh, but this held the hot stuff from the jar better than golden goblets would have done. Bob served it up with beaming looks, and soon he offered a toast. "Merry Christmas, my dear ones. God bless us." And the family re-echoed the toast, and Tiny Tim, last of all, said, "God bless us, everyone." He sat close to his father's side. Bob held his withered hand in his own, as if he feared it might be taken from him. Scrooge, looking at this, said, "Spirit, tell me, will Tiny Tim live?" "I see a vacant stool in the chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner well preserved. If these shadows remain unchanged by the future, the child will die." "No, Spirit, no. You tell me he will live." The Spirit said, "If he'd have died, let him do it and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge bent to hear his own words quoted back to him, but the Spirit was not done. "Man, if you be man, forbear this wicked cant of yours until you know what is surplus and where surplus is. It might be in the sight of heaven that you are more worthless than millions like this man's child." Scrooge cast his eyes to the ground and then raised him when he heard his own name mentioned. It was Bob Cratchit saying, "I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." To which Mrs. Cratchit said, "Founder of the feast indeed! I'd hope he were here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope he'd have a good appetite for it." My dear, the children, Christmas Day. It'd have to be Christmas Day when someone would toast the health of someone so stingy and odious and hard and unfeeling as Mr. Scrooge. Oh, you know it is so, Robert. No one knows it better than you. Christmas Day. All right. I'll drink his health for your sake and for the day's, not for his. To Mr. Scrooge, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I'm sure he'll be merry and happy, I have no doubt. The children drank the toast after her, but it was the first of their proceedings to have no heartiness to it. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he couldn't keep tuppence for it. Oh, there was no doubt about it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family, and the mere mention of his name cast a shadow on the party for 5 full minutes. But when it returned, they were 10 times happier than before. And by and by, they had a song about a boy lost on a Christmas day, sung by Tiny Tim, who in a plaintive little voice sang it very well indeed. In the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made moan. They were not a handsome family. The clothes were scanty, the shoes were far from waterproof, and they were not well dressed. But they were happy and grateful and pleased with one another. And they looked happier yet when they began to fade in the sprinklings of the Spirit's torch. Scrooge kept his eye on all of them, and especially Tiny Tim, until the very last. By this time, it was getting dark and snowing rather heavily as Scrooge and the Spirit walked up and down the streets. The blazing fires and kitchens and parlors and many rooms was wonderful to see. And then, without a word of warning, Scrooge and the Spirit were on their journeys. Much they saw, far they went, and many homes they visited, all with a happy end. The Spirit stood beside miners and sick beds, and they were cheerful. "See, they know me," he said. They went to ships out at sea, and sailors sang Christmas songs. They stood beside struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. And in poverty, and it was rich. They went to almshouse and hospitals and prisons. Everywhere where vain man and his little brief authority had not made fast the door to bar the Spirit out. The Spirit went in, left his blessing, and taught Scrooge lessons. While listening to the moaning of the wind, Scrooge was surprised to hear a hearty laughter. And it was even greater surprise that this hearty laughter seemed to be coming from his own nephew, and that he was standing in a bright, clear, dry, bright, gleaming room, and the Spirit was standing at his side, looking at that same nephew with affirming affability. "You know what?" said Scrooge's nephew. "He said Christmas was a humbug. And you know what? I think he believed it." "For shame of him, Fred." This was Scrooge's niece, Fred's wife. "Oh, yes, he's a comical old fellow, and not as happy as he could be, but his offenses carry their own punishment, and I'll say nothing more about it." "Well, he is rich. At least that's what you tell me." "What of it, my dear? He doesn't do any good with his money. He doesn't make himself comfortable. He doesn't give himself the pleasure of thinking he's going to benefit us with it." "Well, for shame of him, Fred. I have no patience for him." Fred said, "Well, I do. I couldn't be angry with him if I had tried because, well, I feel sorry for him. I mean, who suffers from his ill wills? He does, always. I mean, here he takes it into his head to dislike us and won't come to dinner. Well, I say he just missed a good dinner. That's all I got to say about it. But I mean to give him half a chance every year because I pity him. Oh, he may rail against Christmas year after year, but if he finds me going into his office in good spirits and saying, 'My dear Uncle Scrooge, how are you?' If that puts him into the mind to leave his clerk 50 pounds, well, that would be something. And you know what? I think I got to him yesterday." Well, after tea, they had music because they were a musical family, but the whole time wasn't devoted to music. Or after a while, it was suggested that they play at forfeits, because it's good to be a child sometimes. And what better time than on Christmas Day when its own mighty founder was a child himself. The first game was Blind Man's Bluff. And I no longer believe that old Topper was blindfolded, and I believe he had eyes in his boots. Oh, the way he kept going after that plump sister and the lace tucker. Oh, shame, 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 shame. But there he went, knocking over the fire irons, tripping over the chairs, bumping into the piano. But wherever she went, that's where he went. He never went after anybody else. Why, if you made a feint and fell and stood before him, he would make a feint to catch you, and then he'd sidle off after that plump sister. She often said, "Hey, it's not fair!" And it certainly wasn't. But soon he trapped her in a corner from which there was no escape, and then their behavior became quite execrable. They got quite confidential behind the curtains. There were probably 20 people there, and they all played. And Scrooge himself played, forgetting that his voice made no sound in their ears, and his whole purpose of being there. The Spirit was glad to see him in this mood and smiled at him, such that Scrooge begged like a little boy if he could stay until the last guest left. But the Spirit said this would not be possible. "Here's a new game, Spirit. 1/2 hour more, just one." The game was yes or no. Fred began. "I'm thinking of an animal, a rather savage, disagreeable animal who walks about the streets of London, who grunts and growls and has been known to talk. What am I? A horse? Oh, no. A pig? Oh, heavens, no," said Fred. "A wee donkey? Oh, no. No, and it wasn't a bear, a cat, or an ass." "I think I know," said that plump sister in the lace tucker. "Well, who is it?" said Fred. It's your Uncle Scrooge." And it certainly was, though many people who answered, "Is it a bear?" thought that the answer should have been yes. But Fred continued, "Well, since my uncle has given us such merriment this evening, it would be ungrateful for us not to toast his health. So raise a glass, some old wine, everybody. Come on, raise a glass, some old wine. To Uncle Scrooge. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, whatever he is." Oh, Scrooge had become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the company in an audible speech if the Spirit gave him the chance. But once again, they were on their journeys, and Scrooge, his nephew, turned down the lamp as if he had given utterance to the wish. It was a long night. If only it was one night. Because Scrooge had his doubts, because the Spirit seemed to grow older. He said nothing about this. until they were standing in an open field, and he noticed that the spirit's hair had gone gray. He said, "Our spirits' lives so short. My life on this globe is very short indeed. It ends tonight at midnight. Hark! My time approaches." A local church tower sounded 11:15. "Tonight," said Scrooge. "Yes, tonight." And then Scrooge said, "Spirit, forgive me if I'm not justified in saying this, but I see something there not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a hand or a claw?" "It might as well be a claw for all the flesh there is upon it. Look here." And from the foldings of its robe, it revealed 2 children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable. They knelt at the spirit's feet and clung to its robe. "Look here! Down here! Look! Look!" They were a boy and girl, yellow, ragged, wolfish, scowling, and yet prostrate in their humility. "Good Spirit, are they yours?" "They are man's, but they cling to me, appealing to their fathers. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware them both, and all their decree, but beware this boy, ignorance most. For I see doom written on his brow, unless the writing be erased." And the clock began to chime the hour of midnight. Scrooge said, "Spirit, have they no refuge? No recluse?" The Spirit said, "Are there no prisons? No counting houses?" Scrooge bent his head to hear his words quoted back to him again. And then he raised his eyes, and the Spirit was no longer there. He looked for the Spirit here and there. And when the last stroke of 12 ceased to vibrate, Scrooge remembered the prediction of Jacob Marley, and looking up, he saw a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like mist on the ground toward him. Slowly, silently, gravely the Spirit came. And when it drew near to Scrooge, he fell down on one knee, because the very air in which the Spirit moved, it seemed to dispel mystery and gloom. It was clothed in a deep black garment which covered his head, face, and form. Nothing of it was visible except an outstretched hand. It was tall and stately, and when it drew up to Scrooge, it filled him with a solemn dread. Scrooge said, "Are you the Spirit of Christmas yet to come?" The Spirit merely pointed to the ground. "You are about to show me the things that haven't happened but will happen the time before us. Am I right?" The Spirit inclined its head. This would be the only answer Scrooge would receive. Now, Scrooge had become so accustomed to being in the presence of ghosts that he had gotten used to them. But in the presence of this Spirit, he became so nervous, his knees trembled, that he could barely stand. The Spirit gave him a chance to recover, but this startled Scrooge more, thinking that behind that ghostly shroud, deathly cold eyes were staring at him. "Oh, Spirit, I fear you more than any other specter I have seen. But since I know that your purpose is to do me good, and since I want to be a man other than what I was, I will gladly bear your company and do so with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me, Spirit? The Spirit merely pointed in the distance ahead of them, and Scrooge said, Yes, let us be going. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me. The Spirit moved away from Scrooge the way it had come, and Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which seemed to lift him up and carry him along. The city sprang up around them suddenly. There they were in the heart of it. Shadowy merchants were passing and repassing and jingling change in their pockets the way Scrooge remembered. The Spirit stopped and pointed at a knot of businessmen meeting, and Scrooge went in and listened to their talk.
I don't know anything about it, said a great fat one with a monstrous chin. I just know he's dead, that's all I know.
When did he die? Said another.
Well, last night, I believe.
Well, what did he do with his money?
I don't know. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know.
A third said, It's likely to be a cheap funeral. I don't know anybody who would go to it. Say, why don't we form a party and volunteer?
Well, I don't mind going if lunch is provided. I must be fed if I'm to join one.
Well, you know, I'm not so sure. I wasn't his most particular friend. We used to stop and talk whenever we met. The Spirit glided on and stopped at two other people meeting. They were known to Scrooge. They were great men of business, very wealthy and of great importance, that Scrooge always strove to stand in their high esteem, in a business sense, of course. The first began. Well, old Scratch got his own at last.
Yes, mighty cold for Christmas time.
Are you on for Christmas?
No, something else, I believe.
And they parted. That was their meeting. That was their conversation. That was their parting. Scrooge wondered whether all these strange things he was seeing had something to do with his partner, Jacob Marley, but that was in the past, and this Spirit's presence was the future. They went on, Scrooge intent on listening to every conversation and looking for the shadow of himself when he appeared on the scene, hoping that his future self would offer him some clue as to these riddles he was seeing. But Scrooge never saw himself in any of the multitudes that thronged upon the district. The Spirit stared at Scrooge, and that made him shudder. They left this busy scene and went to a part of the district that Scrooge had never penetrated before. The ways were foul and narrow. The shops and the houses wretched. The people were half naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. The whole corridor reeked of crime, of filth, of misery. They came to a low-brow beetling shop where bones and bottles, rags, iron, and greasy offals was sold. And there, sitting amongst his wares, was a gray-haired rascal, about 70 years of age, smoking his pipe. Scrooge and the Spirit came into the presence of this man just when a woman with a heavy bundle over her shoulder slunk in. She had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, entered, and she was followed close behind by a man in faded gray, an undertaker's assistant. And he was no less startled at the sight of them than they were within each other. And after a period of brief astonishment, they all laughed. The proprietor, old Joe, began. Well, you couldn't have found a better place to meet. Here, come into the parlor and let me see what you brought to sell. The parlor was just a place beyond the pile of rags. The first woman, Mrs. Dilber, entered first and threw her bundle on the ground and looked at the others in bold defiance. She said, "Open the bundle, old Joe, and tell me what it's worth. Speak plainly. I'm not afraid to go first, and I'm not afraid to let these others say. Well, we all knew what we was helping ourselves to before we arrived. Open the bundle, old Joe." Old Joe got on his knees and unfastened many knots until he pulled out a roll of heavy black stuff. He said, "Mrs. Dilber, what's this? His bed curtains? You don't mean you took 'em down rings at all with him lying there, do you?" "What of it?" she said. "Oh, you don't be getting no oil on those blankets." "His blankets? Well, he ain't likely to catch cold without them now, is he?" He didn't die of anything catching, did he?" "Oh, don't you worry about that. I wasn't so fond of his company that I would loiter around for such things and, oh, you may eye that shirt until your eyes hurt. You won't find a hole in it or a threadbare spot. It was the best one he had, and a fine one, too. They would have wasted it if it weren't for me." "What do you mean by wasting it?" "By putting it on him to be buried in. But I took it off him. Calico would be good enough for the likes of him." Scrooge listened to this conversation in horror, and then old Joe took out a flannel bag and told out the coins upon the floor. "Well, that'll be the end of it," he said. To which Mrs. Dilber said, "He frightened everybody off when he was alive in order to benefit us when he's dead." Scrooge listened to this conversation in horror, and the scene changed. He said, "Merciful heavens, the plight of this man might be my own." And he backed up almost into a bed. He was, "Oh, what's this?" And there, under a ragged sheet, plundered and bereft on a bare, uncurtained bed, lay the body of a man. And though it were dumb, it announced his presence with an awful language. The room was dark, too dark to observe what it was, but Scrooge looked about it in secret obedience to know what kind of room it was. And there, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, lay the body of this man. The Spirit just pointed at the head. The cover was so carelessly laid that the mere motion of it, the more lifting of it with a finger on Scrooge's part would have disclosed the face. He thought about it. He felt how easy it would be to do. He wanted to do it, but he had no power to remove the veil that he could to dismiss the Spirit at his side. "Good Spirit," said Scrooge, "let us be going. I shall not forget." But the Spirit remained motionless. "I understand you, Spirit. I would do it, but I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power." The Spirit seemed to look at him. "Oh, Spirit, if there's some person in the city who feels some emotion at this man's death, show them to me now. Let me see some tenderness connected to this." The Spirit held up its robe before Scrooge like a wing for a moment, and then dropped it, revealing a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She was waiting for someone, and with anxious eagerness she was pacing the floor, and she was startled by every sound. At last the knocking was heard at the door, and she ran and opened it to welcome her husband, who was careworn and depressed, even though he was young. And yet there was a look at the light on his face that he fought to repress. She said to him, "Is the news good or bad?" "Bad, I'm afraid, Caroline." "Oh no, then we're ruined." "Oh no, there is still hope," he said. "Hope? Hope only if he relents." "Oh, he is far from relenting. He is dead." She was grateful in her heart to hear this, and she said so with clasped hands, and then she begged forgiveness in the next moment. She said, well, who would our debt be transferred?" "I don't know. But when we find out, we'll have the money ready. But for tonight, we will sleep with light hearts." This home was happier because of that man's death. The only emotion the Spirit could show Scrooge was pleasure. "Oh, Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected to that death. Or that dark chamber will be forever with me." The Spirit conducted Scrooge down many streets, and Scrooge kept looking for the shadow of himself, but saw it not. They came to Bob Cratchit's house, and they went inside. Quiet, very quiet. The family was sitting there. The two younger Cratchits sat in a corner, still as statues. They were looking up at their brother Peter, who had a book open in his lap. The mother and the daughters sat at the table doing needlework, but they too were quiet. And he took a child and placed her in the midst of them. Where had Scrooge heard those words? Well, the boy must have read them when he and the Spirit crossed the threshold, but why did he not go on? And just then Mrs. Cratchit put her needlework on the table and put her hand to the eyes and said, "The color hurts my eyes. I wouldn't want to show tired eyes to your father for all the world. It must be about his time." "Past it," said Peter, shutting the book. "But I've known Father to walk much slower these last few days." "I have known your father to walk very fast indeed," with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. "As have I," said Peter, "often. But he was very light, and your father loved him so. Oh, here's your father now." In came Bob Cratchit with his muffler. Oh, he had need of it so. His tea had been kept warm for him on the hob, and they all strove to see who would help him to it most. Bob sat, and then each of the little Cratchits crawled up, one on either knee, and put a tiny cheek against his face, as if to say, "Don't mind it. Don't be grieved." "You went today, Robert." "Yes, my dear. I wish you had been with me. It would have been good for you to see how green a place it is. But you see it often? I told Tim that we would walk by there on Sundays." The family drew around the fire and talked, and the mother and the daughters kept doing their needlework. Bob told them about the incredible kindness that Mrs. Scrooge's nephew, who he had scarcely met the once, said to him when we met on the street. And, well, he saw that, well, I looked just a little bit down, you know. And when he asked what had caused my distress, and I told him, he is the most pleasantest spoken person you'll ever meet, because when I did tell him, he said, "I'm very sorry for it, Bob. I'm very sorry for your good wife, too." By and by, how he ever knew that, I'll never know. Knew what, my dear? That you were a good wife? I don't suppose we will forget our Tim and this first parting that there was amidst us? No, said the family, never. And when we remember how pleasant and mild he was, we won't quarrel amongst ourselves and forget our Tim. No, Father, never. I'm happy. So very happy. Tiny Tim, the childish essence, was of God. Scrooge said, Good Spirit, I sense our time of parting is at hand. How I know it, I don't know. But before we do, who was that lay upon the bed? The Spirit pointed in front of them until Scrooge tarried a moment and said, Good Spirit, my place of occupation is in that courtyard. There is my warehouse. Let me see what I am to become in the time before us. And Scrooge ran to the window and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The man sitting at the desk was not him. The Spirit continued and gliding along until they came to the iron gates of a churchyard. Here Scrooge was to find out the name of the man who lay upon the bed. The Spirit moved amongst the graves and stopped and pointed at one of them. Scrooge crept towards him trembling. Spirit, before I look upon that grave that you show me, answer me this. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or the things that may only be? The Spirit did not move. Men's courses foreshadow certain ends, that if they be persevered in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, you tell me that the ends will change. Again, the Spirit did not move. And Scrooge crept towards it trembling and looked down the arm which pointed at the stone of the unkept grave, which read, Ebenezer Scrooge, am I that man who lay upon the bed? The Spirit pointed from the stone to Scrooge and back again. Oh, no, Spirit, no, Spirit. Why show me this if I am beyond all hope? I am not the man that I was. Scrooge noticed that the Spirit's hand began to shake a little. Good Spirit, your Spirit intercedes for me and pities me. Tell me I may change these shadows by living an altered life. The Spirit's arm quaked even more. Oh, I will keep Christmas my heart and try and live it all the year long. I shall live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, tell me that is so I may sponge the writing from this grave. Scrooge, in his agony, grabbed the spectral hand. It tried to free itself, but Scrooge was strong in his entreaty. But the Spirit was even stronger and repulsed him. Scrooge fell on his knees and raised his hands in a final prayer to have his spirit yet changed. And he noticed an alteration in the Spirit's hood and dress. It dwindled, shrunk, and collapsed into a bedpost. The bedpost. It was his own. The bed. It was his own. And best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future, Scrooge said, scrambling out of bed. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley in heaven and Christmas be praised. I say it on my knees, Jacob Marley. The bed curtains. They are not torn down. They are here, and I am here. The shadows of the things that may be only. They can be changed. They will be. I know they will be. I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so long, it was a splendid laugh. I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been with the angels. I don't know anything. I'm rather like a baby. Well, I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Scrooge was caught up in his thoughts with the sound of church bells ringing out their lustrous peal. Scrooge ran to the window and threw it open and stuck his head out. No darkness, no mist, just bright, clear, jovial, stirring cold to make the blood dance to. Oh, golden sunshine, sweet fresh air, merry bells, oh, glorious. Scrooge looked down. There was a young boy walking by in his Sunday best. You heard me, lad. What day is it? Why, it's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits did it all one night. Well, they can't do anything they want, can't they? Boy, do you know the poulterers on the next street on the corner? Why, I should say I do. Oh, an intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know if they sold the prize turkey? Not the little prize turkey, but the big one. You mean the one as big as me? Yes, that's it. A remarkable boy. Go and buy it. What? No. Go and buy it and tell the man where to take it. Come back with the man, I'll give you a shilling. Come back with the man in 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. Pew! I shall send it to Bob Cratchit, said Scrooge. He won't know who sent it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Well, the hand, Scrooge sat and wrote the address with a shaky one, but write it he did. And then he took the address and went down the stairs and to wait for the coming of the poulterer's man. And as he stood there waiting, his eye caught sight of the knocker. Oh, it's a wonderful knocker. I scarcely ever noticed it before. It has a handsome look on its face. I shall love it as long as I do. Oh, here's the poulterer. Here I am. Merry Christmas to you. It really was a large turkey and never could have stood on its hind legs or it would have snapped them like sealing wax. Oh, that's too big for you to carry all the way to Camden Town. You must have a cab. Well, the chuckle Scrooge said when he said this, and the chuckle Scrooge had when he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle he had when he paid for the cab, and the chuckle he had when he recompensed the boy was only exceeded by the chuckle he had when he sat down in his chambers and then he chuckled until he cried. I tell you, shaving requires your attention, and particularly for Scrooge because his hand continued to shake, and shaving requires attention, especially when you're not dancing while doing it. At long last, Scrooge got dressed in his best clothes and went down on the street and walked up and down with his hands behind his back and greeted everybody with a contented smile. He had not gone very far when coming towards him were the two portly men who stood in his office the day before with their hats in their hands and said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe." "My dear sir," said Scrooge, shaking both the men's hands, "it was very kind of you." "Mr. Scrooge," they said. "Yes, that's my name, and not a very pleasant one to you, I'm sure. Will you do the favor of receiving?" And he whispered something in their ears. "My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you in earnest?" "Yes, and not a farthing less. There's a many back payments in that, you can be sure." The other said, "Mr. Scrooge, I don't know what to say to such munificence. Don't say anything, said Scrooge. Just come and see me. Will you come see me? We will, said the gentleman. Thank you, said Scrooge. I am much obliged to you. Thank you 50 times. Bless you. Scrooge went to church. And after church, he walked about the streets of London, watching the people go to and fro. Scrooge talked to beggars, and he patted children on the head. But in the afternoon, he set his steps towards his nephews. He must have walked up and down before his door a dozen times before he got up the courage to knock, but he made a dash for it, and knock he did. When Fred saw him, he said, "Well, who is this?" "It's me, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner, if you'll let me in." Let him in. It's a wonder Fred didn't shake his arm off. Nothing could be heartier. Scrooge was at home in a few seconds, and Scrooge's niece, Fred's wife, looked the same as she did, and old Topper, he looked the same when he arrived, and that plump sister in the lace tucker, she looked the same. All the men and women of the party. Oh, wonderful games, wonderful party, wonderful munificence, wonderful happiness. But Scrooge was to his office all the earlier the next morning, if only to catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. It was the very thing he set his heart upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. 9 o'clock, no Bob. 9:15, no Bob. Bob Cratchit was a full 18 minutes off his time. Scrooge kept the door of his counting house open so he could catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. And Bob Cratchit's hat and his muffler were off before he entered the counting house. And then he sat down on a stool and began writing as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. Scrooge said, "What do you mean coming in here at this time of the day?" Trying to feign his old voice as best he could. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm off me time." "You are. Yes, you are. Will you step this way?" "I'm sorry, sir. It's only once a year. It shouldn't happen again. I was making rather merry last night." "I'll tell you what, my friend, I'm not going to stand for this any longer. And therefore," Scrooge said, jumping up from his chair and giving Bob such a dig in the waist that he fell back into the tank, "and therefore, I'm about to raise your salary, Bob." Bob had an idea of knocking Scrooge to the ground and pinioning his shoulders to the floor and calling for help in the courtyard. "What, sir?" "Yes, Bob. Merry Christmas. A merrier Christmas than I have given you in many a years," he said, slapping him on the back. "And I will raise your salary and assist you with your struggling family. And we shall talk of your affairs this very afternoon. But first, make up the fires and go buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I." Well, Scrooge did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, Scrooge became a second father. He became a good a man, a good a master, a good a friend, as that good old city or any other town, city, or borough knew in that good old world. Some people laughed to see this alteration in Scrooge, but Scrooge let them laugh. Scrooge laughed in his heart, and that was good enough for him. Scrooge never had another visit from the spirits, as far as I know, but it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well if any man or woman possessed the ability. And may that be said of all of us this Christmas and always. And as Tiny Tim once remarked, God bless us, everyone. May God bless you Thank you for listening to this story. Merry Christmas. Thank you. Thanks to them back there. And to Jess for this. Great, thank you. I'm sure there's still more scones and shortbread out there. If you don't eat it, I will, and that's not good. I won't be able to fit in this outfit anymore. Thank you. Thank you for coming. You guys were a good audience.
Jess and I want to get a picture of the three of us.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Here, let's move that bench.
I'm not usually short on words, but you have taken all my words out of it. You are
Oh,